Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Gwent. So, this week we're going to be taking a look at a scoia'tael deck I like to call the Imperfect Storm. So, it's an Ithne weather deck, essentially. It's using all of the best weather cards and a lot of movement-based stuff as well, in order to maximize the value that you get off all of your weather, and also filling the board to the point where your opponent cannot find a spot where they're not losing points, and if they do row stack, then we can punish them for it as well. So we can really just manipulate our opponent's board. Wherever they place their units is likely not where their unit's going to end up, so we pretty much control their side of the board as far as positioning is concerned, while also applying weather to every single row as much as possible. So let's have a look at the weather cards that we've got available. We do have Ragnarug, so this is a special weather spell. Apply Ragnarug to all rows on your opponent's side. Ragnarug says at every turn, at the start of your turn, damage the highest unit on the row by 2. So a single unit on each row gets damaged by 2 every single time. So a maximum of 6 points, minimum of, well, 0 really. But you know, it hits whatever's the highest on any particular row, and it can get a fair amount of damage. If left unchecked as well, you can get so much value out of this gold card, so it is a really, really solid weather card. You've got to make sure that your opponent doesn't have first lights and things like that. Always play around weather clear, to the point where you always want to bait out with terrible weather before you slam down the powerful weather. Speaking of powerful weather, you may notice that Drought is not here, and that's because I don't actually own the card. Given the chance, absolutely would get Drought into this deck, getting rid of either Yennefer or Regis. Probably Yennefer first and foremost, because she's not actually amazing, but she fills the spot of a weather card as far as I'm concerned, so she's kind of an weather card. So, we then have White Frost as well, another silver card. Special weather applies frost to 2 rows on your opponent's side. So you pick one row, and it applies frost to that, and then it also applies frost to the one on the row above it as well. So either ranged and siege row, or the melee and ranged row, if that makes sense. And frost as a weather type damages a single unit, the lowest unit on the row, by 2. So yet again, this can get us 4 points every single turn. Minimum 0 if we don't set it up. But we do have plenty of movement to make sure that whatever weather we place down, there should be some sort of unit taking attrition from it. We then have Skellige Storm as well. So Skellige Storm is a single row weather effect. However, this one is arguably more powerful than most of them in certain matchups and certain situations anyway. So it applies Skellige Storm to a row on your opponent's side, and Skellige Storm says every turn at the start of your turn, damage the leftmost units by 2, 1, and then 1 respectively. So if there's 3 units on the board, we're essentially doing 4 points per turn on a single row in weather damage. So yet again, we can set up our opponent's rows. What I like to do is do things like White Frost, which puts weather on 2 different rows, which forces them to stack on the non-weather row, which then plays into Skellige Storm, and then you can start hitting them with the real weather after that point. So it is really fun to just constantly barrage your opponents with weather effects. We then have Nature's Gift as well. Special spell says play a bronze or silver special card from your deck, shuffle the others back. So this allows us essentially to thin out our deck and grab any one of either Skellige Storm, White Frost, or Biting Frost. If you've got access to one of these 2, then you almost certainly don't pick Biting Frost. Speaking of Biting Frost, it is just a single row. Applying Frost damages the lowest unit on the row by 2. These are fetchable by our Elven Mercenaries, so if we do draw into a Biting Frost, we likely want to mulligan it, because Elven Mercenary is going to go get it for us instead. You don't usually want to have a Biting Frost in your hand at all if you've got Elven Mercenaries to pull them anyway. We also have Marigold's Hailstorm. Really stupidly overpowered card right now in the meta. If any deck can run it, it should run it for the most part. Damages all units on a row by half their power, rounded up and ignoring armor. So it gets around the armor-based decks from Northern Realms, It plays really well into our opponent being forced to row stack because of our weather. So, yeah, again, as I mentioned, we apply frost with a white frost to 2 different rows, and then they play it all on the non-weathered row, which allows Marigold's Hailstorm to get stupid value. We can also set up, of course, the Hailstorm with a lot of movement stuff. So we've got Dwarven Mercenaries, 7 power, loyal, agile unit. It says move a unit on another row to this row on its side. If it's an ally, then boost it by 3. So we can either move our units and boost them to either gain extra points or to move them out of weather. Or maybe we've been row stacking and we expect there to be some sort of lacerate effect or hailstorm effect. We might want to spread out the wealth a little bit with the Dwarven Mercenary. So 2 copies of them. And only 2 copies of them because we're actually running Vrahid Brigade. So this is our own anti-weather tech. 8 strength loyal unit as well. Clears the weather from the row that you place it on, and then you get to do essentially what the Dwarven Mercenary does, move a unit to the same row. Could either be an opponent's unit, which allows us to move them into the weather that we've set up, or it could be ours and we move them out of the weather that our opponents set up. Any kind of thing like that. We also have Zoltan Chivet as well, also another movement card. 8 strength loyal gold unit can go onto any row. When you deploy him, you get to move 3 units to this row on their side. And if they're allies, they get strengthened by 2, and if they're enemies, they get damaged by 2. So really solid point values here. 8 strength unit being able to move up to 6 points as well, or damage 6 points, is really cool. But moving our enemies into weather or moving our allies out of weather saves or gains points as well. So he's really solid. He's a lot more points than he kind of looks at a glance, which is pretty sweet. We then also have Regis. Regis is a flex slot. I'm not sure what I replace him with just yet, but not really sold on him just yet. I suppose maybe he takes Drought's spot and we keep Yennefer, or Yennefer goes. I'm not really sure. But yeah, anyway. When he gets deployed, he's a 7 strength gold agile unit. You get to weaken a unit by half its base power, round it up, and then boost self by half its base power. So weakening is really good for us, actually. There are bad matchups for this deck with Skellige's greatsword units. Whenever they get damaged, they get reset and strengthened. So Regis allows us to weaken that unit, essentially halving its base power, which could put it into weather killing effects. So we get to kill the greatsword before it manages to reset and power back up. So Regis is actually quite good tech against that kind of matchup. But also just being able to weaken base power is usually alright to subpar. I'm not really sure, but he's alright, I suppose. We then have Yennefer the Conjurer, so 7 power agile unit. Used to be called Yencon because you played her and you won, but not so much anymore now. She's targetable. She has 7 strength, but she does die to Alzur's Thunder and things like that. I haven't seen Alzur's Thunder in quite some time though, so I'm not sure whether or not she's bad for that reason, you know. Anyway, it says at every turn, at the start of your turn, damage all the highest units by 1. So that's kind of a weather-like effect. If a unit is tied for the highest power as well, then she'll hit both of them. So we can get extra triggers if we manage to line up our opponent's units to the same strength, which is pretty sweet. And if she dies, we get a little bit of value out of her as well. If destroyed during your opponent's turn, damage all the highest enemies by 2. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but at least she gets a final little bit of value out. Kind of worst case scenario, she'd probably get 9 points, you know, that kind of thing. Not too bad at all. We then have Ida Emien, kind of a flex slot. She's got a few little features about her though. 3 strength siege unit. When we deploy her, we get to do one of 3 things. We get to either apply fog to a row, which can be quite useful if we are low on weather. We can clear skies, which allows us to clear all weather on our board. So if we're playing the mirror match and they've got weather on all 3 of our rows, then we can do a weather clear on all 3 in one go. So that's pretty sweet. Most of the time I find myself using the overdose though. It's an alchemy card that says damage up to 6 random enemies by 2. So 12 points. is usually the value that you get for that, which is pretty decent value for a silver card if you can achieve such things. What else are we missing? Oh yes, the ranged row. What's on the ranged row? Well, we've got ourselves some Mahakam Pyrotechnicians. These are generally quite good units. If our opponent is playing great swords though, they do become a little bit of a detriment because you don't get to choose where the 3 damage that their deploy goes, but sometimes you can have maybe a 50-50 chance of not hitting them. We'll see. Anyway, the base power anyway is 5 and it's agile. When you deploy it, damage a random unit on each row on the other side by 3. So up to 9 points you can get for the Mahakam Pyrotechnician, which means he's essentially a 14-point bronze if you can set up the board. And a lot of the times we can actually set that up. We've got the sheer amount of movement available and the fact that our opponent will be trying not to row stack as well in certain situations makes these Pyrotechnicians really good and can really throw a game right back in your favour just with a single blow. They are awesome. I love them. Then we got the Hawker Smugglers as well. This is kind of our way of maintaining a point advantage. So while our opponent's losing points from all of these weather triggers, then they're kind of forced to play more units in to try and counter the weather. What the Hawker Smuggler essentially does is it effectively says that that unit's got 1 less strength as far as it's adding to the board, because every time an enemy appears it gets boosted by 1. So all of, for example, if our opponent was playing this against us, all of their 5-point Mahakam Pyrotechnicians are effectively 4 points because we're gaining the point off of the Smuggler. So we use these guys to just gain a little bit of advantage in the early game and just try push through the points. They are usually our highest point value units, and they can get quite large depending on how well the game goes. Typically we want to try and win round 1, cold pass round 2, and then in the 3rd round we want to slam all row kind of weathers, and our opponent just needs to fight through them. In the first 2 rounds we want to get rid of all of our opponent's weather clear, so that the 3rd round we're in full control of that board and we can just annihilate them with weather. That's the idea. So these are actually quite helpful in making sure that we win rounds 1 and maybe even carry over into round 2 if we want to do that as well. Alright guys, well that is going to do it for the deck tech. Oh no, not quite. We actually have Kieran as well. Kieran is a 9 strength agile unit. Says deploy, toggle a unit's lock, and then move it to this row on its side. So we can unlock one of our own units and move it, or we can lock one of our opponent's units and move it. So it's got 2 uses for it as well. So we might want to use the movement, but we also might want to use the lock as well. If they're getting a, for example, the great swords, which are quite bad against us, we can at least lock one down with a Kieran, which is not too bad. Yes, anyway, on to the matches. There should be a video coming out almost immediately, if not already. And if you did enjoy the deck tech, then be sure to like, subscribe, stick around for the end card as well. There will be a link to the matchups. Alright guys, see you later.